The screech of metal against oak still echoes in my nightmares. That sound, that awful, final sound, is what pulled me from my fog of self-pity on a Tuesday morning that started like every other since my divorce. I was driving home from job interview number 17, rain hammering my windshield, when the black sedan ahead of me suddenly swerved and wrapped itself around that massive tree, like it was embracing death itself. I should have kept driving, called 911 from a safe distance like any reasonable person who'd already had her heart shattered once this year. But something about the way the steam rose from that crumpled hood, desperate and ghostly in the October rain, made me slam on my brakes and run toward the wreckage before my mind could talk me out of it. Maybe it was because I knew exactly what it felt like to be left broken and alone when you needed someone most. The man I pulled from that twisted metal had blood trickling from his temple and the kind of bone structure that belonged in magazines, not mangled cars on forgotten country roads. But it wasn't his looks that made my hands shake as I checked his pulse. It was the weight of his gold watch, easily worth more than my rent, and the way he instinctively shielded something in his jacket pocket, even while unconscious. When those piercing gray-blue eyes finally opened and focused on my face, his first words weren't, "Thank you," or "Am I hurt?" They were a whispered plea that made my blood freeze. "Please, you cannot tell anyone you found me here. Lives depend on it." The paramedics arrived before I could ask what he meant, but as they loaded him onto the stretcher, I caught a glimpse of his hospital bracelet. Not the standard white plastic they give everyone, but something that looked more like diplomatic credentials. And when he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength, his accent held traces of something distinctly European, something refined that didn't match the desperate fear in his eyes. "Emma," he said, somehow knowing my name, though I'd never told him. "I owe you everything, but please forget you ever saw me." That was 3 days ago. The phone calls started that same night. No words, just breathing, then silence. My apartment building's security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned. And yesterday, I found a single white rose on my doorstep with a note in elegant handwriting. Some debts can never be repaid. Some secrets are worth dying for. I've spent 32 years being invisible, forgettable, the woman people look through rather than at. I thought I wanted to disappear completely after my ex-husband traded me in for his secretary. But now, as I stare at this rose and feel eyes watching me from shadows I can't see, I realize that sometimes being invisible is the only thing keeping you alive. They say no good deed goes unpunished. What they don't tell you is that sometimes saving someone's life means losing your own, not to death, but to a world where fairy tales are real, princes wear crowns made of secrets and sorrow, and happily ever after comes with a price tag written in blood. This is my story. The story of how one moment of compassion dragged me into a conspiracy I never asked to join, with a man whose identity could start wars, and whose love might be the most dangerous thing I'll ever touch. It's about the weight of secrets that aren't yours to carry, the price of loving someone the world wants to destroy, and the terrifying realization that sometimes the person you save ends up being the one who destroys you. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever wondered whether one choice could rewrite your entire existence, If you've ever questioned whether you're brave enough to love someone whose very name is a weapon, then you need to hear what happened next. Hit that like button if you believe some people are worth dying for. Comment below if you've ever held a secret that felt like holding fire. And subscribe because this story has 9 more chapters that will make you question everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the monsters that hide behind beautiful faces. What I didn't know that morning was that I wasn't just saving his life. I was signing my own death warrant. The screech of metal against oak still echoes in my nightmares. That sound, that awful, final sound, is what pulled me from my fog of self-pity on a Tuesday morning that started like every other since my divorce. I was driving home from job interview number 17, rain hammering my windshield, when the black sedan ahead of me suddenly swerved and wrapped itself around that massive tree like it was embracing death itself. I should have kept driving, called 911 from a safe distance like any reasonable person who'd already had her heart shattered once this year. But something about the way the steam rose from that crumpled hood, desperate and ghostly in the October rain, made me slam on my brakes and run toward the wreckage before my mind could talk me out of it. Maybe it was because I knew exactly what it felt like to be left broken and alone when you needed someone most. The man I pulled from that twisted metal had blood trickling from his temple and the kind of bone structure that belonged in magazines, not mangled cars on forgotten country roads. But it wasn't his looks that made my hands shake as I checked his pulse. It was the weight of his gold watch, easily worth more than my rent, and the way he instinctively shielded something in his jacket pocket, even while unconscious. My fingers found his pulse, steady but weak. His skin was warm despite the cold rain soaking through both our clothes. I whispered reassurances I wasn't sure I believed myself, telling him help was coming, that everything would be okay. Lies we tell strangers because we need to believe them ourselves. When those piercing, gray-blue eyes finally opened and focused on my face, his first words weren't "thank you" or "am I hurt?" They were a whispered plea that made my blood freeze. "Please, you cannot tell anyone you found me here. Lives depend on it." The sirens were already wailing in the distance. Someone else had called for help, but his grip on my wrist tightened with surprising strength for someone who'd just been unconscious, and something in his desperate expression made me nod before I could think it through. The paramedics arrived before I could ask what he meant. "Ma'am, please step back." The EMT's voice was professional but firm as they worked around the crumpled sedan. I watched them stabilize his neck, check his vitals, asking him standard questions about his name, the date, whether he could feel his extremities. He answered everything correctly, but I noticed how his responses carried traces of an accent I couldn't quite place. European, maybe. Educated, the kind of refined pronunciation that spoke of private schools and diplomatic dinners, not late-night drives on backwoods Tennessee roads. As they loaded him onto the stretcher, I caught a glimpse of his hospital bracelet, not the standard white plastic they give everyone, but something that looked more like diplomatic credentials. Heavy cardstock with an official seal I didn't recognize. "Emma," he said suddenly, his eyes finding mine across the chaos of flashing lights and radio chatter. My name on his lips sent ice through my veins. I'd never told him my name, never even spoken it aloud at the scene. I owe you everything, but please forget you ever saw me. The paramedic was closing the ambulance doors, but his gaze held mine through the narrowing gap until the metal sealed him away from me. I stood there in the rain, watching the red lights disappear down the winding road, my mind racing with questions I had no answers for. The police officer who took my statement was thorough but uninterested. Single car accident, driver lost control in the rain, Good Samaritan called it in. He didn't ask about the expensive watch or the way the victim had known my name. Just another Tuesday morning accident report in a stack of identical folders. But I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this had been routine. The way he'd protected something in his jacket, the fear in his eyes that seemed deeper than physical pain. The careful way he'd spoken to the paramedics, revealing nothing personal beyond basic medical necessity. I drove home with my hands still shaking, rainwater dripping from my hair onto my car's worn upholstery. My apartment had never felt smaller, more suffocating. I made coffee with hands that wouldn't steady and tried to convince myself that I'd imagined the whole surreal encounter. That was 3 days ago. The phone calls started that same night. No words, just breathing, then silence. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Wrong numbers happen. Telemarketers hang up when they realize they've reached a cell phone instead of a landline. But by the third call, I knew someone was listening to me breathe back. My apartment building's security cameras mysteriously malfunctioned the next morning. Frank, our building super, apologized profusely when I asked about it. "Damnedest thing," he said, scratching his gray head. "Whole system went down overnight. Never seen anything like it." I started checking locks twice, 3 times, peering through my peephole before opening the door, jumping at shadows that had never bothered me before. The rational part of my mind insisted I was being paranoid, that the stress of unemployment and my recent divorce was making me imagine connections that didn't exist. But the calls kept coming, always between midnight and 3 a.m., always the same pattern: breathing, silence, disconnect. On the third night, I answered differently. Instead of my usual tentative hello, I whispered, "I know you're there." The breathing stopped. For a moment, I thought they'd hung up like always. Then a voice, soft and distinctly male, said, "He shouldn't have involved you." The line went dead. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a baseball bat, the only weapon I owned, and watched the street through my blinds. Every passing car made my heart race. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. By morning, I'd convinced myself to call the police. But what would I tell them? A car accident victim I'd helped had somehow known my name, and now I was getting mysterious phone calls? It sounded paranoid even to me. Instead, I called in sick to the temp agency. I wasn't scheduled for any interviews that day anyway. I needed time to think, to figure out what I'd stumbled into when I'd decided to play Good Samaritan on that rainy road. The white rose appeared on my doorstep that afternoon. thought-provoking question. Have you ever helped a stranger only to wonder if your kindness might have put you in danger? A single white rose lay against my doormat like an offering to the dead. The note was tucked beneath the stem, written in elegant handwriting that belonged to another century. Some debts can never be repaid. Some secrets are worth dying for. I stood in my doorway for 10 minutes, afraid to pick it up. The rose was perfect, hothouse perfect, the kind that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Its petals were still damp with what I hoped was only morning dew. When I finally brought it inside, my hands were shaking so badly. The paper was expensive, cream-colored with a subtle watermark I couldn't make out. The ink was real ink, not ballpoint pen. Whoever had written this note had time, had cared about presentation. That scared me more than anything. I called Frank again about the security cameras. Still down, he said. Repair company couldn't get anyone out until next week. Funny how these things happened, he mused. 30 years as a super, never seen a system fail so completely. I didn't mention the rose. That evening, I broke my own rule and Googled car accidents from 3 days ago. The local news sites had buried the story. Single paragraph, no names, no details beyond the basic facts. Driver hospitalized, condition stable, cause under investigation. But when I dug deeper, I found something that made my blood run cold. The license plate number, barely visible in one grainy photo from a local blogger's Twitter feed, belonged to a vehicle registered to Meridian International Services. Meridian International Services didn't exist, not according to any business database I could find. The company name led to dead ends, shell corporations, addresses that turned out to be empty office buildings. I poured myself a glass of wine and tried to think rationally. Rich people had shell companies for tax purposes all the time. It didn't necessarily mean anything sinister. Maybe he was just some wealthy businessman who valued his privacy. But then I remembered his eyes when he'd begged me not to tell anyone I'd found him. That hadn't been embarrassment or pride, it had been terror. Pure, undiluted terror. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. This time, I was ready. "What do you want?" I asked before the caller could say anything. "To keep you alive," came the whispered response. "Stop digging, Emma, for your own sake. I've spent 32 years being invisible, forgettable, the woman people look through rather than at. But invisibility, I was learning, was a luxury I could no longer afford." The next morning brought a new horror. My credit cards were frozen, all of them. When I called the companies, they cited suspicious activity, potential fraud, investigations underway. Each customer service representative sounded genuinely confused by their own system's flags. My bank account was untouched, but the message was clear. We can reach you anywhere. I drove to the hospital where they'd taken him. Mercy General was a small regional facility, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. The volunteer at the information desk, a sweet-faced woman in her 70s, was happy to help. "Oh, honey, there wasn't anyone brought in from a car accident 3 days ago," she said, checking her computer screen. "You sure you got the right hospital?" My stomach dropped. There was definitely an accident on Miller Road near the big oak tree. Black sedan, driver was unconscious. She checked again, pulling up admission records, emergency room logs, even ambulance runs. Nothing. No record of any car accident victim arriving at Mercy General that Tuesday morning. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for an hour, trying to make sense of what I'd learned. Either my memory was completely fabricated, which seemed impossible, or someone had erased every trace of his existence from official records. The second option terrified me more than the first. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I called my ex-husband, David. "Emma?" His voice carried the same tired disappointment it always had. "What's wrong now?" I almost hung up, almost pretended this was a pocket dial, a mistake, but I needed someone, anyone, to know what was happening to me, in case I disappeared like the mysterious man seemed to have done. "David, if something happens to me, if I go missing or have an accident, I need you to know it wasn't random." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. I helped someone, and now people are watching me. Jesus, Emma, are you drinking again? Because we talked about this during the divorce proceedings. I hung up. Thought-provoking question. When everyone you trust dismisses your fears, how do you know if you're losing your mind or if the danger is real? I thought I wanted to disappear completely after my ex-husband traded me in for his secretary. But now, as I stared at that white rose and felt eyes watching me from shadows I couldn't see, I realized that sometimes being invisible is the only thing keeping you alive. The next few days blurred together in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. I started varying my routines, taking different routes to job interviews, shopping at different grocery stores. Every person who glanced my way twice became a potential threat. Every car that appeared behind me for more than a few blocks sent my heart racing. I bought pepper spray and kept it in my pocket. I programmed 911 into my phone's speed dial. I told myself I was being smart, prepared, but deep down I knew I was losing myself to fear. The interviews went badly. Potential employers could sense my distraction, my constant glances at doorways and windows. One hiring manager asked if I was feeling all right. I assured her I was fine, but we both knew it was a lie. On Thursday, I saw him. Not the mysterious man from the accident. I still didn't even know his name. But a watcher. A man in a gray suit who appeared at the coffee shop where I'd stopped after another failed interview. He ordered nothing, just sat at a corner table with a newspaper he never read, his eyes following my movements. When I left, he followed. Not obviously, not carelessly, but I'd become hyper-aware of my surroundings, and I could feel his presence like a weight on my back. I ducked into a department store, wove through the aisles, hid in the women's restroom for 20 minutes. When I emerged, he was gone. But I knew he'd be back, or someone like him would be. That night, I dreamed of the crash again. But this time, when I pulled the man from the wreckage, his face was my own. I woke up screaming. I called in sick to the temp agency again. I couldn't keep doing this, couldn't keep pretending I was functional when I was falling apart. But I also couldn't run forever. I needed answers, and I knew there was only one way to get them. I had to find him. They say no good deed goes unpunished. What they don't tell you is that sometimes saving someone's life means losing your own, not to death, but to a world where fairy tales are real Princes wear crowns made of secrets and sorrow, and happily ever after comes with a price tag written in blood. I started with the ambulance company. Eastern Regional Emergency Services had responded to the call, according to the police report I'd managed to obtain through a friend who worked at the courthouse. But when I called them, they claimed no record of the run. "Ma'am, we keep detailed logs of every call. If we responded to Miller Road that Tuesday, it would be in our system. Are you sure about the date?" I was sure about everything, except my own sanity. The tow truck company that had removed the sedan told me the same story. No record, no job, no black car wrapped around any oak tree. It was like the entire incident had been surgically removed from reality, leaving only my memories as proof it had ever happened. But memories, I was learning, weren't enough. I drove back to Miller Road, to the scene of the accident. The oak tree stood untouched, its bark unmarked by any impact. The road showed no signs of emergency vehicles, no broken glass, no skid marks. Even the weather seemed to be conspiring against me. It had rained every day since the accident, washing away any evidence that might have remained. Standing there in the afternoon sun, I began to doubt myself. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was the stress of my divorce and unemployment causing me to fabricate elaborate delusions? But then I remembered the weight of his gold watch, the feel of his pulse under my fingertips, the way he'd said my name. Those details were too real, too specific to be fantasy. That evening, I tried a different approach. Instead of searching for official records, I started looking for him. I scoured social media, news sites, diplomatic listings. I searched for anyone matching his description who might have reason to travel through rural Tennessee on a Tuesday morning. What I found made my hands shake so badly I could barely type. Prince Alexander Konstantin Müller-Habsburg of Wallenhall, 34 years old, unmarried, heir to one of Europe's smallest but wealthiest monarchies. And, according to every news source I could find, he'd been attending a private conference in Nashville that week. Prince Alexander Konstantin Müller-Habsburg of Wallenhall. The name stared back at me from my laptop screen like an accusation. Photos showed the same piercing gray-blue eyes, the same aristocratic bone structure I'd cradled in my hands as rain poured down around us. But these images showed him in royal regalia, at state dinners, shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers. Wallenhall was a constitutional monarchy nestled between Austria and Switzerland, known for its banking privacy laws and political neutrality. The kind of place where billionaires hid their money and governments negotiated deals they couldn't acknowledge publicly. The kind of place where a prince might need to disappear completely after a car accident on a backwoods American road. I scrolled through article after article, piecing together a picture of a man trapped by his bloodline. Alexander had been educated at Cambridge and the Sorbonne, spoke 6 languages fluently, held advanced degrees in international finance and political science. But he'd also been caught by paparazzi leaving nightclubs at dawn, photographed with a string of beautiful women who never lasted more than a few months. The tabloids painted him as the Playboy Prince, but something in his eyes in every photo suggested a different story. He looked like a man trying to escape from inside his own skin. 3 months ago, there had been an assassination attempt, a car bomb in Geneva that had killed his driver and bodyguard while Alexander attended a meeting inside a bank. The official story was that it was a terrorist attack, but the comment sections of news articles buzzed with speculation about palace intrigue and succession disputes. His younger brother, Prince Wilhelm, stood to inherit the throne if anything happened to Alexander. Wilhelm, who appeared in photos with his perfect wife and 2 photogenic children, who gave speeches about fiscal responsibility and traditional values. Wilhelm, who looked like he'd never had a dark thought in his privileged life. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "You found him." The voice was different this time, older, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. "Prince Alexander. You know who he is now. That makes you very dangerous, Miss Chen." My blood turned to ice. They knew my last name. They'd done research on me, too. "What do you want?" "To offer you a choice. Walk away now, forget everything you've learned, and live a long, quiet life. Or continue down this path and discover that fairy tales don't always have happy endings." This is my story. The story of how one moment of compassion dragged me into a conspiracy I never asked to join, with a man whose identity could start wars, and whose love might be the most dangerous thing I'll ever touch. I hung up on the caller and immediately started packing. Not much, just a few clothes, my laptop, the cash I kept hidden in a coffee can for emergencies. If they knew my full name, they knew where I lived, where I worked, probably where I'd gone to school and what I'd had for breakfast. But as I was stuffing clothes into my duffel bag, I found something that stopped me cold. Tucked between my mattress and box spring, where I'd never put anything, was a manila envelope with my name written in the same elegant handwriting as the note that had come with the white rose. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Me leaving my apartment building, me at job interviews, me at the grocery store, the coffee shop, the gas station. But these weren't surveillance photos taken from a distance. These were intimate shots, taken by someone close enough to see the worry lines around my eyes, the way I chewed my lip when I was nervous. Someone had been following me for weeks, maybe months. At the bottom of the stack was a photo that made my knees buckle. It was from the night of my divorce party, the pathetic little celebration I'd thrown for myself at home with a bottle of wine and a frozen pizza. I was crying, mascara streaked down my cheeks, holding up my signed divorce papers like they were a trophy instead of a death certificate for everything I thought my life would be. No one knew about that night. No one had been there. Except someone had been watching. The last item in the envelope was a plane ticket, first class, departing tomorrow morning. Destination: Zurich, Switzerland. The note attached was brief. "If you want the truth, come alone. Tell no one. Trust no one. A." Alexander. It had to be from Alexander. But how did I know this wasn't a trap? How did I know the people who'd been threatening me hadn't sent this to lure me away from any potential help, to a foreign country where I'd be completely vulnerable? I sat on my bed, surrounded by evidence of my violation, holding a ticket to what might be my salvation or my destruction. The smart thing would be to throw it away, disappear into some other life, pretend none of this had ever happened. But I kept thinking about his eyes when he'd begged me not to tell anyone I'd found him, about the terror that was real, immediate, life-threatening. about the fact that I'd saved his life, and now he might be the only person who could save mine. What I didn't know that morning was that I wasn't just saving his life, I was signing my own death warrant. But sometimes, I've learned, death warrants can be torn up and rewritten. Sometimes, the person you save becomes the person who saves you back. And sometimes, the most dangerous choice you can make is also the only choice that leads to freedom. I boarded the plane to Zurich with nothing but my duffel bag and more questions than answers. The first-class seat felt like borrowed luxury, like I was wearing someone else's clothes. The flight attendant offered me champagne, but my hands were shaking too badly to hold the glass steady. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I made peace with my decision. Whether I was flying towards salvation or destruction, I was finally taking control of my own story instead of letting fear write it for me. The Zurich airport was a maze of glass and steel, filled with travelers speaking languages I didn't recognize. I followed the signs to baggage claim, my eyes scanning every face for threats, for watchers, for any sign that I'd made a terrible mistake. That's when I saw him. Alexander stood near the customs exit, wearing jeans and a simple black sweater that made him look nothing like the prince in the official photographs. His hair was shorter, darker, and there was a thin scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there in any of the royal portraits I'd studied. When our eyes met across the crowded terminal, he smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him, tinged with relief and something that might have been gratitude. "Emma," he said as I approached, and hearing my name in his accent felt like coming home after a long journey. "Thank you for trusting me." "I'm not sure I had a choice," I replied. His expression grew serious. "There's always a choice. You could have thrown away the ticket, disappeared, started over somewhere safe. The fact that you're here," he paused, studying my face, "it means you're braver than I had any right to hope." He led me through the airport to a waiting car. Not a limousine or anything royal, just a simple black sedan that looked remarkably similar to the one I'd pulled him from weeks ago. "Where are we going?" I asked as we pulled into Swiss traffic. "Somewhere we can talk freely. Somewhere I can tell you the truth about why saving my life that day put yours in danger." He glanced at me, those gray-blue eyes holding shadows I was only beginning to understand. "And somewhere I can figure out how to keep you alive long enough to maybe, possibly, fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between us like a promise and a threat, because I was already halfway there, had been since the moment I'd felt his pulse steady under my fingertips in the rain. "Alexander," I said softly. "Yes? This better be one hell of a story." He laughed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. If you've ever wondered whether one moment of courage could change your entire life, if you've ever questioned whether love is worth risking everything for, if you've ever felt invisible until the right person finally saw you, then this story was meant for you. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances that come disguised as disasters. Comment below and tell me about a time when helping someone changed your own life forever. And subscribe, because Emma and Alexander's story is just beginning. Sometimes the most extraordinary adventures start with the most ordinary moments of human kindness. And sometimes saving someone else
is the first step towards saving yourself.